While international law guarantees the freedom of religious communities to determine their own leadership and practices, we have the case of Tibetan reincarnation. The Tibetan case illustrates how these rights can be constrained and often used by state parties to kind of assert their own control and to control something that is inherently spiritual, inherently like a religious phenomena and not something that is under the purview of state's control. I would say without enough evidence or justification, because we see in the order number 5 that talks about measures on management of reincarnation of living Buddhas in Tibetan Buddhism. The article in its objective is claims that it is to guarantee citizens freedom of religious belief, to respect Tibetan Buddhism's practice of inheriting living Buddha's positions, and to regulate the management of living Buddha reincarnation affairs. That is not what it actually does for Tibetan Buddhism. And under Article 5 of this order, so this is a limitation that is prescribed by law. When you're limiting someone's freedom of religion, it should be prescribed by law. It should be a threat to public health, moral, or it should infringe on fundamental freedoms of others. So we're going to see if that is the case with, China's control of Tibetan reincarnation. So under Article 5 of the order, there is a set procedure for registration and approval of reincarnations or living Buddhas, as the government calls it. It sets out some procedures where the reincarnated monks or the reincarnated lamas have to register with a local Buddhist association, and then they have to apply for a reincarnated lama to be approved by the
Dạ.
state. So
Em nghe
depending
dạ.
on the impact or the influence that a certain religious leader or a reincarnate would have, it has different levels of approvals. So a large impact, a large influence, like a religious teacher or a Buddhist leader with a moderate or large influence would be subject to provincial or regional government approval. And then someone with greater impact would be subject to state administration for religious affairs. Religious leaders as impactful and influential as His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama would be subject to state council approval. I want to bring us back to the limitations that we talked about in ICCPR and when it is justified for a state to actually limit freedom of religion of individuals and communities. The order number 5, which regulates Tibetan Buddhism, could be argued to have, introduced against, perceived threat to public order due to Tibetan, history of political resistance against the occupation. But there is no evidence that the reincarnation and the system and the tradition of reincarnation itself is disruptive of public order or disruptive to, public safety. This can be further evidenced by the fact that His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama has renounced all his political power in 2011, and now he is currently solely a religious leader, solely a religious figure for Tibetan people and the world. So this kind of defies the limitation that is prescribed under ICCPR of how such a limitation is permissible when, it is a threat to public safety or order, and that is not the case with the Tibetan reincarnation system. This is what happens when there is a politicization of religious practice. It is absurd to think about a state trying to control a phenomena such as reincarnation, right? A reincarnation is by logic out of a state's purview. You cannot approve or disapprove a reincarnate lama without the knowledge of the way it has traditionally been recognized and how it has been traditionally followed. And then I also want to, yeah, when we talk about health or morals, there is no evidence that the Tibetan Buddhism and the reincarnation system is a threat or causes any kind of disruption to public health or morals. And when we talk about whether it infringes fundamental freedom of others in the state, it is actually limiting the very fundamental freedom of Tibetan communities around the world, and especially in Tibet, who have been deprived of their freedom to manifest their own religion through, worship, through practice, and through choosing their own leadership. When a state uses these limitations as a disguise to kind of forward its own interest and assert its own state interest, that is when it causes irreversible damage to something like Tibetan Buddhism.